Okay, we are live. So I would like to welcome everybody to our second Gamification Roundtable. Gamification Roundtable is an online event organized by Games for Business with the aim to bring together experts from all over the world to create a platform where we can, opinion leaders and experts can share their views and personal and induce professional discussions about gamification in the HR field. And we have, again, 4 invited guests. But let me first introduce who we are, the organizers. Games for Business develops online simulation games and gamification-based solutions for HR and marketing purposes, including recruitment games for multinational corporations and higher education institutions. And we will invite representatives from both the enterprise and the provider side to bring together both aspects and approaches to this Google Hangouts session. To discuss the various application areas in gamification. I recommend all of our viewers to ask questions and comments. They can do this with the hashtag Gamification Roundtable, and they can post their questions either on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. We will collect all those posted hashtag content on gamificationroundtable.com on the hashtag wall, where they can follow these posts. And if we see any questions there, then we will also discuss those during our session. You can basically do that if you are on gamificationroundtable.com next to the broadcast window, so feel free to do that. And let me also introduce our topic for today. Our topic for discussion today is employee engagement. And we have 4 invited speakers here. Let me briefly introduce them, and then in alphabetical order I'm going to go, and then they will introduce themselves personally as well. I have Robert Bencze, a Director of Human Resource Consulting and International Mobility at PwC Hungary, PricewaterhouseCoopers, also known, who has more than 20 years of experience in HR, including senior level positions in several fields of business. We have Monica Cornetti from the United States. She's a gamification keynote speaker and designer who is rated the #1 gamification guru in the world by UK-based Leaderboarded, and she is the author of a book that applies gamification to training situations as well. She has been designing and delivering gamification programs for her clients since 2008, and she hosts a weekly gamification talk radio program. We have Arun Mansukhani from Dubai, who is the ex-associate vice president of HR at Vodafone India. He's also an open-minded entrepreneur who is currently the chief executive officer at the UBU Group, a content staffing, executive search, and HR consultancy company with offices in Singapore, in Malaysia, and Dubai. And currently he's joining us from Dubai. And we have Krzysztof Przybylski, if I pronounce his name correctly, I hope. He's the advisor to the board at Polish gamification provider Gamfi. He's an expert and evangelist of gamification, and he designs processes for sustainable engagement of consumers and employees for corporations, startups, and nonprofits. And my name is Peter Filak. I am the business development director at Games for Business. I will be your moderator for this discussion. But let me immediately pass the word to our guests and ask them to introduce themselves briefly and tell me where they're coming from. Robert, can you please start?
Yes. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation for the roundtable discussion. As it was mentioned in the short introduction, I'm currently working for PricewaterhouseCoopers in the field of HR consulting, and well, my HR consulting and HR background provides a lot of experience in going into new directions like gamification, and I have, let's say, a very hands-on experience related to this topic, because as PwC Hungary, we are practicing an own gamification solution for branding and, let's say, employer commitment building. So as a company, as a user as well, we are working with this solution, and of course as a consultant we are offering these kind of solutions to clients. So I think that's my background and history regarding HR and gamification.
Thank you very much, Robert. How about you, Monica? Can you share with us where you come from and what you do?
Sure, Peter. Thanks for having me on. I am based in Austin, Texas. Keep Austin weird. And my focus has been always in the area of training and development. Corporate training's been broken for a long time. There's compliance training, the training that really needs to change business processes, but it's delivered in a way that people aren't retaining it, it's not stickable. So I started adding gamification in a low-tech method back in 2008 before I even knew gamification existed. I had no idea that there was a growing trend out there. So I've been designing and delivering gamified training since 2008 for my clients. And it's all about determining, is this a training issue or a process issue? Is this a can't or a won't? And how can we fix it? And so adding that low-tech gamification is what I consider your entry point, and we can come back to that throughout the hangout together.
Great, thank you very much, Monica. Arun, can you share?
Yes, indeed. So basically, I would say that I am in this conference more in my capacity as a potential investor and a potential sort of I would say, a corporate entity that likes to get into a gamification business model. Of course, in my time as a corporate executive, we've tried various methodologies and what Monica referred to as maybe low-tech entry point gamification type of models. But where really I think my perspective today is more from the perspective of looking at gamification as a business model. I think it's vital to the way HR systems need to change across a variety of models, whether they be performance management, whether they be recruitment models, whether they be succession planning models, and so on. So I see gamification from a perspective of a potential investor, a company that wants to invest in gamification models and use that across industries, in different parts of the world. I think the key really here is to also look at the cultural nuances of gamification, because that's key in terms of its delivery to different markets. And that's pretty much, I think, my focus in terms of what my company is looking to do.
Thank you, Arun. And last but not least, Krzysztof, can you introduce yourself as well?
Hello everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Krzysztof Przybylski. Congratulations, Peter, on deciphering my name. It was perfect, so excellent job. I'm coming from a corporate environment. I've been working in Procter & Gamble for the last 5 years and was trying to gamify internally in enterprise area. And I was also doing some personal consultancy in this area. And recently I've joined Gamfi, where I'm advisor to the board, and I bring my experience from the corporate environment to the company that was very successful in consumer gamification, in marketing implementations, in Facebook and in the web, and taking over the enterprise gamification branch. So we are doing the first implementation in enterprise gamification area, and I'm leading this area for Gamfi.
Thank you very much, and thank you all of you for accepting our invitation to join us. Okay, so our topic today is employee engagement, and it's a really crucial and hot topic in HR, in the HR scene nowadays. Companies are struggling to boost motivation levels and maintain loyalty and commitment among their colleagues, and the incredible amounts of resources are lost due to the lack of motivation, especially with the millennial and post-millennial generations, so-called X and Y and Z generations, becoming more and more represented in the labor market. And these are new challenges that HR is facing all over the world, I guess. And this is actually where I turn to our experts and ask them, what is your experience with employee engagement tools, and what benefits can gamification can bring to this area? So how do you see that? And Krzysztof, since you're ranked #2 in the loyalty games in this online competition, you must have a good overview in this area, I guess.
From my current experience, I can see that there is a big need for gamifying learning and development experience in a corporate environment, especially for managers who are usually very busy, engaged in many different activities, and simply don't have time or incentive to find the time to invest in their growth and learning processes. So this is very important, and I see this as a crucial issue. Connected to this is knowledge exchange in big organizations, because they very often put in different silos, and there are some significant barriers in communication and knowledge flow within the organization. So I think that those two areas are very good starting point for gamification in enterprise, because I see that the need is very big and the return of investment is significant, because you can really get the value back if you invest time and effort to implement gamification for learning and development.
And did you see do you have any experience with any specific tools that you might have come across?
I see that people are trying to do this by themselves. They're looking for some consumer-related products, and they just trying to bring them inside the corporations and try to use them. The biggest, I think, the most successful tool that I've seen is Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow. I see people using it very often and getting a lot of value back. So in many cases, I see people trying to replicate the same engagement and the same tools within the corporations with different successes or failures connected with that. So I think that's the good example that you can leverage later on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Monica, what would you add to this, since you might have also some experience?
Well, what Krzysztof was saying, again, we're kind of speaking the same language, that I think that employee engagement from the onboarding to training and development is the key places for organizations to start where it can really have impact. And of course, I've been doing strictly low and no tech, maybe some hybrid along the way where you bring in a learning management system. But on my radio program every week, I've been interviewing people who have just some of the most outstanding platforms that I couldn't even imagine. So, like from Belgium, there's a company called Pactify, P-A-C-T-I-F-Y. So when you're managing projects and you're trying to get the buy-in from the team for these milestones and deadlines, Pactify is actually this agreement of, can I count on you to do what we just said we're going to do? And they have seen significant increase in reaching the milestones that are set. And when you look at traditional projects, 80% have a chance of failing or most likely going to fail, and they've seen that number come down significantly. And then right here in Austin is Adam Hollander and Fantasy Sales Team. So his is all up for his for teams that are working on sales and sales competitions, and Adam's just done an amazing job. And then there's that company, it's called Games for Business. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But they have an outstanding, when you go to their website, what you're seeing there is what you're getting as far as recruitment of employees. So there's a lot of good platforms out there, but I think like what Krzysztof said, the key is that the reason that I think gamification fails is because people look at it at the surface level and they think, well, we can do that. We just, point badges, leaderboards, we can make this happen, but they're not really fully understanding the depth of the psychology and the drivers that need to go with it. So it can be simple, but it's never easy. And I think that's when you're looking at for companies, the tools that work are different for each organization. There's not like do these 3 steps and you'll have a perfectly or 6 steps or 12 steps. It's different for every demographic, geographic area, what you're trying to fix, make better, change.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Robert, do you want to go next? Since you have some experience already and you might also be watching your competitors, what they apply.
Yes. Before saying or mentioning one example, I think you have to take a look at employee engagement from 2 perspectives, because if you talk about it generally, employee engagement can mean increasing the commitment to the company, to the whole organization. But at the same time, increasing the commitment to some projects, to some issues, to some specific, let's say, actions. And what I've seen is that gamification is a very powerful tool to increase commitment to specific issues, to specific projects, to specific elements. Of course, if you have many of them, it can have a general effect on a general commitment to the company. Just one example that I have seen, as Monica mentioned, that she started to use gamification without knowing that it is back in 2008. I have an experience from 2009 when I have been involved in a very long training course for commercial people, and we wanted to, let's say, somehow organize a serious kind of an engagement at the end, testing their knowledges, having some. And we have created a kind of a board game with small car models, with small, let's say, models of houses, and playing the game itself was the exam. And before that, any examination after long training courses have been, let's say, boring or administrative stuff. In this case, the commitment of doing the exams and understanding the importance of the knowledge was extremely high. So I think it was back in 2009, without knowing it was gamification. But it just shows that a commitment to complete specific projects, a commitment to complete specific tasks. I think gamification is a very powerful tool. Throughout the series of these commitments, of course, you can directly or indirectly improve the commitment or the engagement, general engagement of the employees towards the whole organization.
Thank you, Robert. And before I turn to Arun, I just wanted to suggest, since sometimes your picture and sound is disappearing or a little bit distorted, if you have a technician on hand, maybe you can make sure that you have the right bandwidth, because sometimes I think I'm not understanding everything very clearly what you're saying. I don't know what the others experience, but there might be some bandwidth issue there. I hope it will fix itself out, or if you have somebody who can help you.
Well, I don't have a technician right at hand. I try.
Thanks. Arun, how about you? As you said, you come now from the investor side. Did you? I mean, I guess you must be monitoring the market heavily and being really invested in that. So, can you share with us if you come across some interesting examples?
Yeah. What I'll do, Peter, is first I'll talk about my time, in the corporate environment, and I'll talk about employee engagement for a moment, if you don't mind, before I focus on the gamification aspect, because I think that's critical. The issue really, are we here?
Yes.
Okay. The issue really is that I think employee engagement by itself is a rather complex issue. To be engaged with your employer in an organization is a summation of many things. It's about money, it's about your boss, it's about your industry, it's about your job, it's about the country you live and work in, it's about how it's really working out for your family, the bigger environment, and so on and so on. So I think employee engagement by itself is a rather large topic. Now, in terms of gamification, it's really about which aspect of employee engagement is the gamification process or model trying to sort of address. In my opinion, you can't really gamify everything, because that becomes a sort of cry wolf. It's a bit of a sort of commonplace occurrence or a commonplace theme that takes away the niche that I think gamification should really provide to its audience. So the main issue really, in my opinion, is that gamification needs to be such that it's focused on specific projects and specific agenda times that are relevant to the organization at that point in its evolution. I think that's critical, right? Now, in terms of my own experience, both as a corporate executive and now as an entrepreneur in the market, I think as a corporate executive, I've seen many people use gamification models, different formats, whether internet-based, digital models, or the more sort of low-tech, role-play-driven type games, etc., etc. And I think the one danger that I've seen is that if there is no linkage to behavior in the workplace, gamification can be just a game. right? When it's not. Okay, and I think that's an issue. That's an issue for guys who are working in companies to really take note of, which is you go through a process, but you're actually then not really doing a take forward thereafter. So I think that that's something that people need to think about. In terms of what I see in the market right now and the relevance of gamification, I see so many companies out there, Peter, you know that we're sort of quite actively exploring the environment. But I think companies such as yourself are particularly interesting because you're very niche, you're very focused, you're working with clients like PwC that obviously have a certain standard in terms of their own expectations. And I think that's important. When gamification is talking to a specific aspect of the employee engagement scenario, I think that's when it becomes more and more relevant. The danger is when gamification is used to solve every problem, and when it exists everywhere in the organization, and the HR guys or the line guys get up and say, okay, let's gamify this. I think you have the sort of risk of losing the woods for the trees. That's my experience. I think going forward, just to sum up, going forward, I see gamification as being vital, not just in employee engagement, but as being vital to the sort of four silos of HR, which is attract, retain, develop, excite. Right? If that was to be the HR story, I think gamification could well play a key role in all of those aspects. And again, the key is what is the game, what's the sort of relevance and credibility of the game, and most importantly, what's the take forward by the organization after the games are played, right? I think that's sort of my initial reaction.
Okay, thank you very much. And we heard some really great suggestions in terms of implementation. And so we are moving on to the company is trying to implement gamification, but they don't have the experience. So what do you see as some of the major risks and some of the common errors that they don't avoid when implementing, when they should avoid when they implement gamification in employee engagement? And Monica, as a designer and consultant, I guess you have quite a bit of experience in this regard.
Well, I can tell you, Peter, that it doesn't matter if I'm talking to an uber big company that has more money than God, or a small startup. When we start talking about why they want to gamify and what are their business objectives, regardless of the size of the company, 100% of the time they can't verbalize what that is. They, like, well, we want to improve customer satisfaction, or we want to enhance employee development. Well, what does that mean? We can't, that's nothing that we can measure, that we can see that gamification is having a positive impact on. So I think the main risk in going into gamification is thinking that it's going to be like spending time in the candy store and just getting to eat all this really fun, sweet things that aren't normally part of doing work, and this is going to be really special. But what we have to start with, the biggest risk is not starting with what are you trying to achieve and making it into measurable outcomes. What's the business metric, and then what do our players need to do in order to achieve those metrics? This is not the part that people consider fun, but my little fundamentals are the building blocks of fun. We have to do that first in order to have fun. And I think that's the biggest risk that companies face, is not wanting to spend the necessary time in that area to hammer it out. It's not fun. It's tedious. My clients want to tell me to go home. Go home. We don't want to talk about this anymore. But until we do, it's not worth making your investment into gamifying something, because how will you even know that anything's different if we're not getting any kind of measurables? So that's what I consider the biggest risk.
Thank you. Krzysztof, you're an advisor to a board. What advice would you give to other boards?
I definitely and totally agree with Monica, and I want to build on Arun's intro, that you have to be very specific on what you want to gamify and what outcomes do you want to get. Because when we start talking and I see people saying, we have to gamify our recruitment process. But why? I mean, what kind of metric do you want to put there? What do you want to have when you finish gamifying this process? What difference do you want to make? These are very important questions, and I totally agree with Monica what she said about being very specific and have the measures set up front. And the other aspect I think that is very important is to be familiar and really put the shoes of the people that you want to gamify, because very often I see people in the middle management, setting some goals and having some objectives and having some concept of gamification, which is totally not the way that people in the bottom of the organization see the process and what are their expectations and their needs. And we very often confront what our sponsors are saying with what our prospects or our gamified people are saying, what are their needs and the problems and issues that they face every day. And very often we see a huge difference and huge discrepancy between those two. And showing that is the second step to really put the very good measures and objectives for the whole project and implementation of any tool or changing any process.
Thank you. Robert, we were talking about middle management. How does higher management do it? I'm pretty sure higher management also wants to avoid as many risks as possible.
Yes, and I hope now my voice is better.
It's better.
Okay. Just one remark on the dangers, and then I will answer your question, is that going back to what Arun mentioned, that gamification is not a solution to everything. Probably this is the biggest trap what HR people can fall in at the moment, that wow, it's fashionable, it's nice, it's fantastic, so let's gamify everything. I think it's impossible. Then you lose the momentum if you want to do that. And the other hand is that, and this is important for any top managers, that this is not something that you buy and you will have immediate fantastic results without any investment from the company side. If you want to achieve an objective that you define beforehand, you have to work very hard to make it happen within the organization. I have rarely seen off-the-shelf gamification solutions that can immediately bring the results if you want to provide some. Of course, you can have some easygoing smaller games with easy implementation, but if you would like to have a real impact, on one hand, you have to take time and effort and put time and effort into it from the organization side, and then you have to manage the change, because even people like it, even people can be more committed to playing a game. They have to learn how to do it, and they have to learn how to use it. Just one example, as I mentioned, that we are using I would say now, a very, very sophisticated gamification solution for employer branding and for selection purposes in PwC Hungary. Our organization is developing this tool for 4 years now, and we work hard on that. And we still have some things to do, and we still have something how to make it better. But it's a continuous work if you want to achieve results. And I think after several developments, we can just get closer and closer to what we want to achieve. So probably the biggest danger is underestimation of the effort that the company has to put in that to make it work.
Thank you, Robert. Arun, do you want to add to that?
Sure, I'll add a couple of points because I think this is really interesting facet. The risk, really. I think the risk is from an employee perspective. The minute HR comes up with something new, I think the first thing that happens is employees typically get defensive. Yes, employees get defensive.
Yes.
Especially when you're sort of subtly trying to measure them and you say this is just a game. They're sort of linking it to what's going to happen in the appraisal. They're linking in what's going to happen to their promotions, their compensation, and so on and so on. So I think that any methodology of gamification or sort of initiation of gamification in a company has the immediate risk of not putting employees on a sort of red alert status. I think that's number one. Because the minute you say that we are bringing in this outside consultant to develop a game, you know, it looks like a sort of big brother is watching you mechanism sort of packaged like a Trojan horse and coming in and doing things that they might not really expect them to do. So I think that's one part in terms of the entire communication process of the fact that the gamification process is going to help them and not harm them. I think that's number one, and that's a huge risk, right? Because the moment you don't have employee buy-in, they're going to tune off. It's over. It's over right there, number one. Number two, I think, is also the question, and I'm going to build on Robert's point here because you guys have been doing this for 4 years, Robert, which is amazing, right? And I think that to think that a company is investing so much time, so much effort, so much resource in actually getting it right through the iteration process, right? Through sort of standardizing, validating, building credibility, through sort of ongoing commitment to a project. I think that's awesome. I don't know how many companies would really do that, because I think for many HR guys, and forget companies in particular, for many HR guys in different companies in different countries, it might sometimes end up being a tick in the box, which is, okay, the CEO said, let's try this. So the guy goes and he says, okay, we did this. And you have the risk of it becoming a cookie cutter rather than it being a customized, bespoke solution for the company. And I think that's the second risk. The third risk is the gamification company itself. More than the game, I think the gamification company, which is a game cannot be a game unless the gamification company or the developer really understands the sort of inner skin of that company, understands the cultural nuances of the company, understands the current marketplace challenges of the company. Because a gamification or a gamified product cannot be done in isolation of business realities. Because then nobody's listening again. It then becomes what Monica said, a sort of trip to the candy shop and you're wasting time, right? So in my opinion, I think to summarize, Peter, on this point, it's really about the credibility. It's about not putting employees on the defensive, and it's about not having a cookie cutter model, which is one size fits all. Don't bother about what's going on in context to your challenges. I think those could be quite serious risks that would dilute any effort to sort of gamify a company's operations or HR processes.
Just a very quick remark on that before any of the audience could think that you should develop a gamification solution for 4 years. For us, it was 4 years because if we wouldn't do any improvements after the first years, then would have lost the interest of the players. And we could use the game for 1 year. But we want to use it for longer purposes, or let's say after those investments many times. That's why we had to invest again to make it interesting, to make it, let's say, enjoyable for the people who are playing. Because it's not a one-time thing if you want to make it serious.
True. Yeah. Just like in the example of other games out there, actually. So gamification in that respect is, I think, similar. And since we're already mentioned some examples and best practices, but I want to turn to you. Can you maybe share with us some more such good examples that you have come across, especially focusing on employee engagement, specific best practices or case studies that you came across? Monica, you want to share with us some experience?
Well, again, since my focus has primarily been in the area of training and development, I don't want us to forget, I'll call them easy wins. And when I say easy wins, I don't mean that it doesn't take effort in the strategy of the planning. But for example, I just this past week did a webcast with Kimberly Clark. Their finances didn't permit to bring me in live, so we changed it to a webcast. But because it's a webcast, we think when we're designing training and development, we as the corporate side love webinars, love webcasts because of the scalability and the lowered cost, and people can be anywhere and they'll engage with the instructor. But we all know that they don't. They toggle off just as soon as they can. So to really get your money out of a webcast, that is such an easy place to start to actually add gamification elements. And we're doing an hour to maybe 90-minute webcast. You can do the basic gamifications at this point because you don't need to do like what Robert was talking about, engage for 4 years, which is much more complex. In a 90-minute webcast, we're doing basic, we're doing badges, we're doing points, we've got a leaderboard, we've got teams, we've got collaboration, we have some competition, and they can win some prizes. And the great thing is immediately afterwards when you're doing level 1 and level 2 evaluations, they got stuff, and they can tell you how they're going to actually use it on the job. And most times when we're doing webcasts, we're just there as little as we have to be to get the credit for being there. You know, click through, answer this, information, take a quiz. And although we as, when I say we, I mean the HR and the leadership that wants to deliver training, we think these are fantastic delivery models. Reality is on the other side. Most people are just doing the bare minimum. And is that what you really want out of your training program? If you're going to invest dollars into training, you want it to stick. You want it to be applicable on the job. So when I'm thinking of case studies and best practices, I always think, you know, start where you can. Start smaller and take advantage of what you already have in place. Your sunk cost, you've already sunk costs into training. How can you enhance that? So that's always my strategy as far as getting into the arena of gamification, because I know we're going to come back and talk about costs, and it can be a huge barrier to entry for a lot of companies. But it doesn't have to be if we can start where we are or start where we can.
Right. Krzysztof, do you agree with Monica in terms of starting small and scaling it bigger maybe with success?
Yeah, actually today I was participating in Contact Center Trends conference in Warsaw, Poland, and I've been talking to many companies running contact centers, and I've seen that there is a huge issue with engagement because those people, agents on the phones, they are constantly challenged to do more and deliver more, and their work looks very similarly, almost exactly, as previous day and the day after. So they don't have the sense of progression and growth, and they, you know, are bored or just, you know, feel that the routine is too heavy for them. On the other hand, as Arun said about this big brother risk, there is no such risk there because each of their activities is tracked, monitored, measured anyway. It's just putting the right incentives and giving them the right feedback. And some of the team leaders are doing this, you know, with their ideas offline, with the bare minimum that they have or they can do for their teams, and it works. Very simple motivations, you know, making the routine different and delivering some surprises for the team or engaging them in some participation games when they have a break or something like that, and they start small and they see the significant result in the way the people communicate and they work and how they engage with clients over the phone. But the issue is with the scale. So it works for 10 people. How can we make it work for the whole contact center of hundreds or thousands of people? And then you need to bring some digital solutions because you need to connect to those platforms that they already have, which track and measure their activities, and just put the right incentive and right feedback at the right time to make them more engaged and more fulfilled in their work. Because when you provide them specific goals and you show how they progress and develop skills, how they gain knowledge, they feel that they are moving in the right direction and they are not standing still in the one place. You know, nevertheless, they are spending 8 hours on the phone each day. They see that they have this sense of progression and growth, and this is very important. So I think that it's not the matter of applying points and leaderboards and badges. It's more about understanding of psychology of those people and just giving them support and encouragement that they need. And points and badges are just means, and those can be done differently, but actually those work very well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially coming from Hungary, where we have Budapest, which is probably the capital of shared service centers, or the so-called call centers nowadays. We are approached by these types of companies quite a lot because motivation and loyalty is a key crucial issue in their operations. We ourselves have actually developed an employer branding game for such a company here in Hungary. And some of the feedback, for example, from users has been that they actually found out through this gamified recruitment solution that this is not really a job for them. And if you think about it, I mean, this is also a way of saving money, that you don't recruit or hire people that are not applicable for your job. So you saved immediately. But Arun, how do you see it as an investor? Does an investor like to start small and make and go to bigger scale with step by step?
Okay, I think from an investment perspective, Peter, I think what's really right is a game. I mean, if I had a game in the sort of company employee HR arena, that was the equivalent of a performance simulator, I would invest. It's very simple, right? A Formula One simulator is not really a game. It's what these guys practice in for hours and hours and hours, and it costs millions and millions of dollars to develop. Right now, if I found, and if I could find in the market, and I know it doesn't exist because every company has, its own sort of nuances. But if we could find a game which is equivalent to the survival of an employee's life in the marketplace, then I think I would sort of invest in that without thinking very much. Right? Because I know that in addition to the 8 or 10 or 12 hours that an employee puts into his or her job every day, this part of their daily job is going to be critical to their survival. So give me a game that's critical to employee survival, and I will buy it. I will invest. That it's a no-brainer. But I think the key question here is it need to have? Is it nice to have? Is it discretionary or is it mandatory? Right?
Yes.
That's the call. That's the call that's sometimes left to HR guys and CEOs, which I think is possibly the wrong call. The call that needs to be made is the users. Do the guys who need to sell products in the market need to use that? Do the guys who need to answer calls from customers need to use that? Do the guys who need to fix IT problems in the company need to use that? And by virtue of using that, can they get better at what they do and therefore move up their own career? I think if it was clear line of sight, clear linkage to your actual day job, and you got better doing that by playing a game or by gamifying a certain aspect of it, for me, that's the investment that I would make, no holds barred, right? So that's the sort of take that I have on this point.
Yes, and since we have already touched on the topic of money and expenses and costs, and Monica has also mentioned, let's talk about this. Let's talk money and see how much organizations need to maybe budget if they want to implement gamification. And Robert, you have already hands-on experience at your company with implementing gamification solutions for HR purposes. How do you approach this question of budgeting costs?
Well, I usually say that you can start it between 5 and 100,000 euro. And the reason why I'm saying such a big gap, that yes, you can start small, but of course you can invest a lot. I don't think, and probably this is something that we start to discuss with clients at the beginning. Was it me?
There's some background noise actually coming from.
But there's nothing happening around here. Okay. So we always try to talk about that. Forget about planning some very big entity. It goes back to the reality of starting with something small. Can you hear this strange echo? It's like in the Alien movies, but I hope nothing will happen like that.
It does sound like Alien movies, exactly.
So what I see, just to make it short, is that companies are ready to invest in that, but they want to be on the safe side at the beginning, because they have to somehow sell it to the top management. And it goes back to one of the first questions, that if you want to implement anything like that, and if it costs money, then somehow you have to prove the value for that. And that's why we are saying start in small. You don't have to start in a very big game at the beginning. Then you can just develop it, involve it. And after that, I think if you see the results, it will be easy to understand the investment. If you have the investment, then the results, and you can measure the financial outcome, the success, then you can definitely will invest. As Arun mentioned, he would invest in something that could generate value. That's the same with companies. But this is new, and that's why they have to start on an area when they can see immediate results. And just mention one thing, as Arun mentioned, this survival issue, I think probably the most potentially successful area when you can start to gamify something with not that big investment is when new employees are joining the company, and you would like to have a simulation program for them, you would like to have some induction sessions for them, because they have to survive in the company. And you can teach them in a simple game how to survive. They will be engaged. They will have lots of, let's say, practical information at the beginning, and you can generate value easily with not such a big investment.
Thank you, Robert. Krzysztof, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I would like to build on Robert's thought that I don't like to talk costs. I like to talk about return on investment, and this is very important. Like, if we have a specific goal, if you have a specific measure, and we can find some kind of benefit for our gamification, whether it's a cost optimization or you have some additional income, then we can discuss, how much can we invest in that, how big return of investment we can get from gamifying some processes, and staying within the contact center area. I found a very good study on CallLogic's company, which gamified their wellness program for employees, for agents. And they found that with those wellness activities, like they were gamifying physical activities like walking, using bike instead of the car, activities related to building the community and getting people together, and different things. And in the end, they saved $2,000 per year per employee. That was their return on investment, because they didn't have to have such a big recruitment, because people were not quitting the job, because people were healthier and were coming to job more often. From 15, they reduced 80% the absence on a given day in this company. So that's a great improvement because of gamifying the wellness program. And I think that this is a very good example how you can approach gamification and putting this into the organization. Talk rather about benefits and how can we get the return on investment than how much we need to pay for it.
Thank you, Robert. Monica?
Krzysztof is saying about the return on investment is so key, because when you're looking at how much is this going to cost, if we take it back to, and just again, training and development, roughly Chapman Alliance in their survey research says that about $6,000 per contact hour to deliver instructor-led, over $50,000 per contact hour if you want to do a full game, top-tier, alternate reality, avatars, gaming, high-level graphics. So what are you going to invest? When you look at the return on investment, if you do start small, you can show that return on investment and show the value that you've added back into the company, and then keep rolling that forward by demonstrating how you'll be able to keep adding that value back. And the key thing when you're thinking about investment, the place you can't skip is what we were talking about, Arun was talking about earlier, is finding out what's really going on. What is the corporate culture? What's the objectives? What are the processes? Who are your players? What habits do they have right now, good and bad? What behaviors do you want differently? And until you know that, just slapping some type of gamification on top isn't going to change. You can't fix a broken system with gamification. You got to find out what's really going on and what we want differently. So that's one area that you want to make sure that you're willing to invest the time, money, and energy to find out what's really going on and how can gamification help us to change that. So just, you're going to spend some money. It just depends on what level you want to, at what level. If you want the full gamified, game-like experience, it's going to be a whole lot different than more simple process.
Thank you, Monica. Arun, I believe you have some thoughts to that. Just a moment, Arun. You're on mute for some reason, and we're trying to put you back from mute. Can you try to unmute yourself, because it seems like...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think that in the current scheme of things, Peter, my sort of very humble analysis of where I see gamification is that it's still probably the domain of global multinational companies. Yes. I think that what's really happening is that companies which look at it in a more central perspective and then maybe roll out to different other branch offices or country offices and so on, I think those are companies that are primarily in the process of making the investments in gamification at this point. That's where I see the sort of current logic. In terms of actually measuring return on investments, in terms of mapping a certain budget, in my opinion, the way logically it might work in today's context is that if the training budget is $100, I presume that for most companies, the gamification budget will be a subset of the training budget or the learning and development budget. It's not going to be, it doesn't have the sort of stature, I think, in today's corporate environment yet to hold its own for a standalone budget. It's always going to be a subset. That's my personal opinion. I may be wrong. Robert may disagree, and Krzysztof may disagree, and Monica may have an opinion, but this is my opinion, right? I think that in terms of the actual budgeting process, it's always going to be in the domain of subset of a larger, bigger budget, learning and development, training and development, whatever you call it. How much, how far, how deep, how customized, etc., I think would be questions that are probably answered by multinationals at their corporate offices and not so much at the country offices. That's my sort of intuitive reckoning of where I see the whole budgeting activity going. The last point is how much. It's really about how deep. And like Robert said, it's €5 to 100,000 euros or 500,000 euros or whatever the number is. But I think it's really how deep and how fast and how credible a company wants to actually gamify a process. I go back, and I'll close with this comment. I go back to my Formula 1 simulator example. I'd have to spend a couple of $1,000,000 a month just to keep that running, right? But that's vital. So is gamification in that domain yet? I don't know. Don't have a question, but can't come on that kind of budget yet. I think maybe in time to come, but maybe not quite yet.
Thank you very much for your summary, Arun. And I would like to wrap up and thank for all of your input throughout this discussion. I hope our viewers found this conversation as useful as I did, and I hope they learned something that they might apply in their business needs. So we are going to say goodbye until our next gamification roundtable session, which is going to take place next month. In the meantime, you will actually be able to meet us in October in Köln, in Germany, at one of probably the largest European HR event at Zukunft. We will have our stand there with Games for Business. And also, after Köln, we will be in London for the OnRack conference. So hopefully more discussions and more insights from the area of gamification, online recruitment, employee engagement, and so on, and all these topics that keep us busy. We appreciate all the feedback and all the suggestions for future topics that you can share with us. Please do that with the hashtag Gamification Roundtable. We will be happy to consider those for future talks. And I thank you all very much for participating and for your time. Thanks for joining. And I would like to say goodbye to everybody.